My name is Jim Moore. I'm an editor, web editor with the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, AOPA. And this is the kind of event where I spend some time explaining what AOPA is, because unlike Oshkosh and Sun and Fun and the big general aviation events that we have around the country each year, not everybody here is a pilot, although I've been pleased to meet many AOPA members here and enjoyed talking about turning aircraft like this into useful tools for firefighters. That is something that pilots can help with. How is that? Well, pilots are suspicious people by nature, and we were particularly suspicious of our equipment. We're suspicious of the aircraft that we fly. So every minute that I'm in the air in a manned aircraft, I'm expecting the engine to fail. I'm anticipating what can go wrong, and I'm figuring out ways, how would I mitigate the risk, how would I pull the rabbit out of the hat, how would I achieve a successful outcome when the systems around me begin to fail. So I look, as I'm flying along, I'm looking down for golf courses, I'm looking for farm fields, I'm looking for open areas, and this is a constant process. And it's that kind of mentality that I think can be useful when you're talking about operating UAS in a fire service environment. In a fire service environment, you're going to be responding to structure fires, you're going to be dealing with search and rescue missions, you're going to be dealing with complex environments with probably bad weather, probably a lot of stress involved, probably a number of things that are going to make it very difficult for you to get the job done, for firefighters to get the job done. So while we will not necessarily be flying systems like this with thumbsticks for that much longer, there's a lot of automation already built into a DJI Phantom like this, and there's more automation to come. I think the pilot mindset is what's going to make a difference. And at the end of the day, it's still the human being that is going to be the most important factor in determining success and failure of any operation, and that includes a normal flight around the pumpkin patch or a structure fire response using multiple UAS. So I'm, I guess, making a pitch, and I want to make it clear that I'm not really here speaking for AOPA. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do for the pilot community in a moment, but I wanted to get this pitch out, my own personal view, out of the way and out there for people to think about, that the value of a pilot is being mentally engaged in the system, mentally engaged in the task, being able to size up the situation around you at all times as it evolves, as it changes, anticipate what can go wrong, and then come up with ideas, means of addressing the risks, mitigating the risks, like finding the farm field. In the case of a drone, you want to think about lost link. The system will probably automate to a point, but if you haven't thought about the environment that you're in, then you can get into some trouble if the drone's going to be flying line of sight back from the point where it lost link back to where you started, back to the home point. If there's obstacles in the way and the system doesn't have, like this generation, does not have robust obstacle detection and avoidance, then you're going to get yourself in trouble. The drone's going to get itself in trouble. But if you think it through and approach the flying task the way that pilots approach manned aviation, you're going to be able to anticipate that, yeah, those trees over there are going to be a problem if the system, if I have a system failure. Another example would be basic failures of GPS onboard flight controllers, some of which you're not going to be able to compensate for. A quadcopter is going to come down if it loses a motor, and that's just the reality of it. But if you're staying engaged in the process and flying like a pilot, you will at least have the ability to be able to control the situation to a degree, to plan your mission before you even start the flight, so that you're not going to be flying a UAS over non-participating persons if it's not absolutely necessary to do so. So that kind of thinking is, I think, what the manned aviation community can contribute to the UAS community, including the firefighting community. And it's not just about being pessimistic, but it's about taking a systematic approach, I guess you could say, or a more rigorous risk assessment based approach. So before you ever put the props on the ship, think about what's the environment that you're in, what are all of the factors, weather, obstacles, persons, non-participating persons, and even in a dynamic situation, if you make a habit of sizing things up, you can go a long way toward ensuring a successful outcome, even if the system fails you, which very often they will. So AOPA, we are 350 some odd thousand pilots across the country, largest aviation organization in the world. We've been around since 1939, and AOPA has provides a variety of services to this community, safety and training products, which are free, not just to AOPA members, but they're free to all. And I would encourage anybody who's interested in UAS operations to check some of this stuff out, because not everything is going to apply one-to-one. It's not necessarily, for instance, instrument procedures are not necessarily going to be terribly relevant to a UAS operator, I would hope. But if you start to kind of just dive into some of these materials, some of these, we have online courses, quizzes, seminars, accident reports even. If you start to analyze other people's failures and reverse engineer and think about how you could have, as a pilot, prevented the bad outcome, it's going to set you up for a more successful outcome yourself. So risk assessment is a big thing. We have a risk assessment tool for general aviation pilots as one of our offerings on the website. It allows you to, and you can adapt that for fire service use as well. You don't necessarily take it as it is. But when we look at risk assessment for general aviation, we think about things like weather. We think about things like fatigue. We think about external pressures that may be on us to complete a mission, and recognize that any kind of external pressure that's going to affect your decision-making process could compromise your safety. So if you add up all of these risk factors, you come up with a score. And then the score is going to basically give you some guidance to make a decision about whether you should make the flight or not. Or in the case of a fire service mission, you can decide whether the equipment that you're about to use, is that the appropriate equipment for the mission? Do you have the right pilot for the mission? So those kind of decisions are really at the heart, I think, of what it is that pilots bring to the table, because we think an awful lot about what we do before we do it. And it sounds like basic common sense to me as I'm saying it, but you'd be surprised when you get caught up in a mission-focused environment where you're under a lot of pressure. You'd be surprised how easy it is to skip over some of those things and then get yourself into a situation that's going to be problematic that you didn't necessarily have to be in. In addition to safety and training products, we have online publications. I'm one of the editors of the AOPA.org website, and I'm the editor also of the AOPA Drone Pilot Newsletter. And if you haven't already done so, go to aopa.org/dronepilot. You can sign up for free. You do not have to be an AOPA member to receive it. And you're going to get a mix of news, features, safety and training tips, legal stories about legal matters, regulatory policy matters, all the kinds of things that what I curate is the information that I would want to know as a UAS operator, regardless of what my mission is. I want to make it useful, a quick read, something that's not going to take up a lot of your time in the day, and you will be able to be connected to the community of UAS pilots of whatever mission. So I think that there's strength in that. We have safety in numbers is one of the things that we talked about when AOPA welcomed unmanned pilots in February. It was a relatively recent development. So we created a membership option for UAS pilots, and that's another thing that could be beneficial to the fire service as well. Not necessarily every pilot on the staff, but you might want to consider at least one of your pilots becoming an AOPA member, being able to access some of the additional services that we do provide to members, including an 800 number that you can call and get answers to very technical aviation questions from experts who I am very pleased to call friends and colleagues. We've drawn some of the best folks from the aviation industry to come and work for us and help our members figure things out and understand complicated problems. And that is about it. I think I've covered risk assessment, training. Training is another thing. I could spend maybe just another minute on that. Just my own story. Before I bought a Phantom like this, I spent a couple of weeks flying a $50 toy from Amazon around the house, scaring the cats. But what I learned from that was, navigating in an obstacle-rich environment. I learned it became second nature to make the correct control inputs, especially when the ship turns around and it's head on as opposed to tail on, and your right stick essentially reverses. It takes the mind a little bit of time to wrap around that. It was very important to me to be able to master that kind of skill and to fly the system as manually as possible. Because number one, I am always expecting something inside of this box to fail. I'm expecting something to break, and no, I may not be able to save the ship, but if my mind is engaged in the act of flying, then I think I've got a fighting chance at least positively influencing the situation, if not saving the aircraft itself. And certainly a much better position to keep it away from people, keep it away, to prevent it from causing damage to persons or property, which is always your top priority when you're a pilot. And we did have a lot of discussion within AOPA as we were preparing to welcome UAS pilots as members about the terminology, what to call them. Are they drone operators? Are they UAS operators? And we settled on pilot, and the publication the email newsletter that I mentioned is called AOPA Drone Pilot because this is an aircraft. And when you're flying an aircraft, whatever size it is and wherever you happen to be, you are a pilot. And when you're a pilot, you have authority and you also have responsibility. And we wanted to instill in people, especially the newcomers to aviation who are joining our ranks, that there is a lot of responsibility that comes with operating this. AOPA is committed to safe integration of UAS, so we don't want UAS hitting manned aircraft, obviously, or causing other problems, causing damage to structures, persons, property, that sort of thing. So we settled on the word pilot because it accurately describes what you're doing when you're flying an aircraft, and it also conveys to people that, and this also happens to be what the FAA calls you when you have a Part 107 certificate. You are a remote pilot with a small UAS rating. So that sense of responsibility was very important to us. And as it applies to the fire service, I think that when you're out there in the field, when you're using these things, if you're thinking a step or two ahead, if you're assessing the situation, assessing the risks, and maybe even consider having a pilot who is dedicated to that task alone and not responsible for anything else going on in the fire ground, I think you might find that that also enhances safety. And with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you.
Not a word.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Very good.